The 8-year-old boy stood between 4 leather-clad bikers and their motorcycles, his thin frame trembling, but his voice steady. "Don't start your motorcycles." The words hung in the desert air like a warning shot. Behind him, hundreds of pounds of steel and chrome gleamed in the Arizona sun. Beneath one of those machines, something impossible, something that would stop these hardened men cold. What was hidden under that motorcycle? Why would a child risk everything to confront the most dangerous-looking men in the parking lot? And what would they find when they finally looked beneath the chrome and shadows? Some warnings you can't ignore. Some moments change everything. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gravel parking lot of Rusty's Diner, a weathered roadside establishment that had served travelers along Route 89 for nearly 4 decades. The painted sign above the entrance had faded to a pale shadow of its original vibrant red, and the chrome trim that once gleamed now bore the patina of countless Arizona dust storms. Inside, the air conditioning struggled against the September heat, producing a rattling hum that mixed with the clinking of silverware and the low murmur of conversation. Marcus Brennan sat in the corner booth, his broad frame taking up most of the cracked vinyl seat. At 42, his face told stories that words never could, deep lines etched around his eyes from years of squinting into desert wind, a jagged scar along his left cheekbone from a bar fight in Tucson 8 years prior, and a perpetual expression that warned strangers to keep their distance. His leather vest, adorned with patches that proclaimed his allegiance to the Iron Serpent's motorcycle club, hung heavy on his shoulders, like a uniform he could never quite remove. Across from him, 3 other members of his club finished their meals in comfortable silence. Danny Ortiz wiped grease from his fingers with a paper napkin, his tattooed forearms flexing with the motion. Rick Paulson pushed his empty plate away and reached for his coffee, the ceramic mug looking absurdly small in his meaty hands. Tyler Webb, the youngest of the group at 26, scrolled through his phone with one hand while mechanically shoveling fries into his mouth with the other. "We should hit the road," Marcus said, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes he'd finally quit 3 years ago. "Want to make Gallup before dark." The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Doreen, approached with the check. She'd served them without comment, without the usual nervous glances that followed the Iron Serpents into most establishments. Marcus appreciated that about Rusty's. Nobody here cared who you were or what you rode, as long as your money was good. Outside, 6 motorcycles sat in a neat row, their chrome and steel gleaming despite the dust coating everything else in sight. Marcus's bike, a custom-built Harley-Davidson with flame decals that had seemed like a good idea 15 years ago, anchored one end of the line. The machines represented more than transportation. They were identity, freedom, family. Everything that mattered in a world that had long since stopped making sense to men like Marcus Brennan. The bell above the diner door chimed as the 4 bikers stepped into the blazing afternoon heat. The temperature had to be pushing 95 degrees, unusual for late September, but not unheard of in Flagstaff. Marcus pulled his sunglasses from his vest pocket and settled them on his nose, the world instantly dimming to a more manageable brightness. "Man, I need a cold beer and about 12 hours of sleep," Danny said, stretching his arms above his head until his spine popped audibly. "This run is killing me." "Should have thought about that before you stayed up playing poker in Albuquerque," Rick replied with a smirk. "Lost what, $200? $250, Danny admitted sheepishly, "but I would have won it back if you guys hadn't dragged me out of there." Marcus barely registered their banter. His attention had shifted to something else. A small figure standing near his motorcycle. A boy, no more than 8 or 9 years old, with disheveled brown hair that stuck up in odd directions, and a dirt-smudged face that spoke of a day spent playing outdoors. The kid wore a faded blue t-shirt with a cartoon character Marcus didn't recognize. shorts that had seen better days, and sneakers held together more by willpower than stitching. What struck Marcus most were the boy's eyes. Blue, startlingly clear, and fixed on the motorcycles with an intensity that seemed out of place in such a young face. The kid wasn't admiring the bikes with typical childlike wonder. He was studying them, looking at something Marcus couldn't see. "Hey, little man," Tyler called out, his tone friendly. "Those are some nice rides, huh? You like motorcycles?" The boy didn't respond. He took a step closer to Marcus's Harley, his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. Marcus felt the first stirring of something, not quite concern, but awareness. Something in the kid's body language set off alarms that years on the road had fine-tuned to perfection. "Kid's probably just looking," Danny said, already pulling his keys from his pocket. "Come on, let's roll." Marcus moved toward his bike, his boots crunching on the gravel. The boy's head snapped up, those blue eyes locking onto Marcus with surprising focus. For a moment, neither moved. Then the boy spoke, his voice higher than Marcus expected, but carrying a firmness that stopped all four bikers in their tracks. "Don't start your motorcycles." The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus frowned, unsure he'd heard correctly. Rick laughed, a short bark of amusement. "What'd you say, kid?" "Don't start your motorcycles," the boy repeated, louder this time. His thin frame trembled slightly, but he held his ground, positioning himself between Marcus and his Harley. "Please." "You can't." Marcus exchanged glances with his brothers. This was unexpected. Kids usually either ran away from the iron serpents or begged for rides. They didn't issue warnings with the desperate earnestness of someone trying to prevent a disaster. "And why's that?" Marcus asked, keeping his tone neutral. He crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to the boy's eye level. Up close, he could see the tracks of dried tears on the kid's cheeks, the way his lower lip quivered despite his brave stance. "Because of my sister," the boy said, his voice cracking. "She's under one of them, under the motorcycles. She's trapped." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Marcus felt his chest tighten, a surge of adrenaline washing away the post-meal drowsiness. He looked at the row of bikes, then back at the boy, searching for any sign of deception or confusion. He found only raw, terrified honesty. "Which one?" Marcus demanded, his voice sharp enough to make the boy flinch. The child pointed with a shaking hand toward the middle of the row, at Rick's bike, a massive Road King with custom exhaust pipes and a leather seat that sat low to the ground. Marcus moved fast, covering the distance in 3 long strides. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the bite of gravel through his jeans, and peered under Rick's motorcycle. At first, he saw nothing but shadows and the gleam of chrome. Then his eyes adjusted and his breath caught in his throat. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, lay curled in the narrow space between the kickstand and the rear tire. Her eyes were closed, her small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She wore a pink dress covered in dirt, and one of her arms was twisted at an angle that made Marcus's stomach clench. How long had she been there? How had none of them noticed? Holy! Rick's voice came from behind him, thick with shock. "Nobody move," Marcus ordered, his mind racing through possibilities and dangers. "Nobody touches anything. Tyler, call 911. Danny, get me a blanket from one of the saddlebags. Rick, you stay right there and don't even think about touching that bike." He turned back to the boy, who had dropped to his knees beside Marcus, his face pressed close to the ground as he tried to see his sister. "What's your name, son?" Marcus asked gently, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Ethan," the boy whispered. "Ethan Cole. That's my sister, Lily. She fell asleep there. I was supposed to be watching her, but I went inside to use the bathroom, and when I came back out, she was gone. I found her under there, and then I saw you guys coming out, and I was so scared you'd start the engines and—" His words dissolved into sobs. Marcus placed a large, calloused hand on the boy's thin shoulder, feeling the tremors running through the small frame. "You did good, Ethan," Marcus said, meaning every word. You did real good. You might have just saved your sister's life. Through the gaps beneath the motorcycle, Marcus could see Lily stirring slightly. Her eyelids fluttered, and a small whimper escaped her lips. The sound drove straight through Marcus's chest, like a blade. He'd seen men die. He'd watched brothers go down on the highway, watched friends lose everything to drugs or prison or their own demons. But the sight of that tiny girl, so fragile and vulnerable, trapped under hundreds of pounds of steel and chrome, awakened something in him he'd thought long dead. The sound of sirens began building in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Doreen had come out of the diner, her hand pressed to her mouth in horror. Other diners followed, forming a loose semicircle around the scene. Marcus was dimly aware of Tyler talking rapidly into his phone, giving directions and details to the emergency dispatcher. "Is she okay?" Ethan asked, his voice small and broken. "Is Lily okay?" Marcus looked at the boy, really looked at him. Beneath the dirt and the tears, beneath the bravado that had allowed him to stand up to four dangerous-looking bikers and issue his desperate warning, he saw a scared kid carrying a burden no child should have to bear. He saw himself, 35 years ago, standing in a similar parking lot, while his own little sister lay in a hospital bed after their father's drunken rage had sent her tumbling down a flight of stairs. "She's breathing," Marcus said, forcing certainty into his voice. "That's what matters right now. The paramedics are coming. They'll know what to do." But even as he spoke those reassuring words, Marcus couldn't tear his eyes away from the small form under Rick's bike. One wrong move, one careless start of an engine, and the tragedy Ethan had prevented would have become horrifyingly real. The rear tire sat mere inches from Lily's head. The exhaust pipe, which ran hot enough to melt skin after even a short ride, hovered dangerously close to her exposed leg. Two Flagstaff Police Department cruisers pulled into the parking lot, lights flashing but sirens now silenced. Officers emerged quickly, assessing the situation with trained efficiency. An ambulance followed moments later, its red and white paint scheme bright against the dusty landscape. Paramedics jumped out, already pulling equipment from their rig. Marcus stood and backed away, giving the professionals room to work. His brothers gathered around him, all traces of their earlier casual demeanor gone. They watched in tense silence as the paramedics evaluated the situation, speaking in low, urgent tones as they figured out the best way to extract Lily without causing further injury. One of the police officers, a lean man in his 30s with Davidson on his nameplate, approached the bikers. His hand rested casually near his service weapon, not threatening but ready. "Anyone want to tell me what happened here?" he asked, his eyes moving between the four iron serpents and the scene unfolding around Rick's motorcycle. Marcus stepped forward, drawing the officer's attention. "The kid, Ethan, he stopped us before we could start our bikes. His sister somehow ended up under one of them. We had no idea she was there." Officer Davidson's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught the slight narrowing of his eyes. The judgment was there, unspoken but clear. What kind of people don't check under their vehicles? What kind of carelessness leads to a child nearly dying? Marcus wanted to defend himself, to explain that they'd parked hours ago in an empty lot, that there'd been no children around, that they couldn't have known. But the words felt hollow even before he could voice them. The truth was simple and damning. They hadn't been paying attention. They'd been thinking about the road ahead, about cold beers and comfortable beds, about anything except the possibility that a vulnerable child might need their awareness. A female paramedic with grey streaks in her dark hair knelt beside Lily, her movements slow and deliberate. "Okay, honey," she said softly, though the girl appeared unconscious again. "We're going to get you out of there. Just stay still for me." Two other paramedics positioned themselves around Rick's bike. With agonizing care, they began lifting the motorcycle inch by painstaking inch. The metallic creak of shifting weight seemed impossibly loud. Marcus held his breath, watching as the gap beneath the bike widened, giving the paramedics room to work. Ethan stood frozen, his hands pressed against his mouth, tears streaming freely down his face. Without thinking, Marcus moved beside the boy and placed a hand on his shoulder again. Ethan didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned slightly into the contact, as if drawing strength from the solid presence of the large, intimidating biker who, minutes ago, had been nothing more than a stranger in leather. "Where are your parents?" Officer Davidson asked Ethan, his tone softer now. The boy's face crumpled further. "Dad's at work. Mom's gone. She left us 6 months ago. Dad doesn't get home until 7. The information landed with heavy implications. 2 kids, essentially unsupervised, at a roadside diner in the late afternoon. A 5-year-old girl wandering off to curl up under a motorcycle for a nap. An 8-year-old boy carrying responsibility far beyond his years. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a crack in the carefully constructed walls he'd spent 2 decades building. He joined the Iron Serpents at 22, running from a past that involved foster homes, absent parents, and a criminal record that included assault and theft. The club had given him purpose, identity, a family bound by choice rather than blood. But it had also allowed him to become hard, to view the world through a lens of us versus them, to stop caring about people outside his chosen circle. This kid was shattering that worldview with nothing more than his desperate courage and his tears. "Got her," one of the paramedics announced. With coordinated precision, they slid Lily out from under the motorcycle and onto a backboard. Her small body looked impossibly fragile against the white plastic and orange straps. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, examining the twisted arm, looking for other injuries. "She's stable," the grey-haired paramedic reported. "Looks like a broken arm, possible concussion, but she's breathing well. We need to transport her to Flagstaff Medical Center for evaluation." Ethan broke free from Marcus's hand and rushed toward his sister. "Lily! Lily, wake up!" "Whoa, buddy," a young male paramedic caught Ethan gently. "She's okay, but we need to take her to the hospital. Can you give us some information? What's your phone number? We need to call your dad." Ethan recited the number through his tears, and Officer Davidson immediately pulled out his radio to relay the information. Marcus watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment, as if he were observing the scene from outside his own body. As the paramedics loaded Lily into the ambulance, Ethan tried to climb in after her. The grey-haired paramedic stopped him kindly. "I'm sorry, sweetie, but we can't take you with us. You're not injured, and we need room to work on your sister. The police officer will help you get to the hospital, okay?" "I can't leave her!" Ethan's voice rose to a near scream. "She needs me. I promised Dad I'd watch her." The raw anguish in those words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He moved without conscious thought, stepping forward and kneeling beside the distraught boy. "Ethan," he said firmly, waiting until those blue eyes locked onto his. "Listen to me. Your sister is going to be fine. Those paramedics are the best at what they do, but right now she needs you to be strong. She needs you to let them do their job and get her to the hospital as fast as possible. Can you do that?" Ethan's lip trembled, but he nodded slowly. "Good man," Marcus said. He looked up at Officer Davidson. "I'll take him. I'll follow the ambulance to the hospital and stay with him until his father gets there." Davidson's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but—" "I'm taking him," Marcus repeated, his tone brooking no argument. He stood, keeping one hand on Ethan's shoulder. The kid just saved his sister's life by having the guts to stand up to 4 bikers who probably scared him half to death. Least I can do is make sure he doesn't have to wait alone. The officer studied Marcus for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "Fine, but I'll need to see some ID, and I'll be checking in at the hospital." Marcus pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license without complaint. He knew exactly what the officer saw: a man with a record, a man who wore his outsider status like armor. But for once, Marcus didn't care about the judgment. The ambulance pulled away, lights flashing, and Marcus felt Ethan's small hand slip into his calloused palm. The boy looked up at him with eyes that held equal parts fear and trust, a combination that made Marcus's throat tighten unexpectedly. "You promise she'll be okay?" Ethan asked in a whisper. Marcus Brennan, who had spent 20 years learning not to make promises he couldn't keep, looked down at the child whose warning had prevented an unspeakable tragedy, and found himself saying, "I promise I'll do everything I can to make sure she is. Come on, kid, let's go." The Flagstaff Medical Center emergency room hummed with controlled chaos, beeping monitors, hurried footsteps on linoleum floors, the sharp antiseptic smell that seemed universal to hospitals everywhere. Marcus guided Ethan through the automatic doors, his large frame creating a path through the waiting patients and harried staff. The boy's hand remained locked in his, the small fingers gripping with desperate strength. "Lily Cole," Marcus said to the receptionist, a tired-looking woman with reading glasses perched on her nose. "Little girl, just brought in by ambulance. This is her brother." The receptionist's expression softened when she saw Ethan's tear-stained face. "Have a seat. I'll let the doctors know family is here. Do you have insurance information?" Marcus felt Ethan tense beside him. "I don't know," the boy admitted, his voice barely audible. "Dad has the cards." "That's okay, sweetie," the receptionist said kindly. "We'll sort it out when he gets here. You two can wait in the family room. It's quieter there. Through those doors, first room on your left." The family room was a small space with uncomfortable chairs, outdated magazines, and a television mounted in the corner, playing some daytime talk show with the volume low. A coffee maker gurgled in the corner, producing a brew that looked like motor oil and probably tasted worse. Marcus and Ethan were alone, which Marcus found oddly relieving. He didn't want to deal with curious stares or questions about why a 42-year-old biker was sitting with an 8-year-old kid he'd met less than an hour ago. Ethan climbed into one of the chairs, his feet dangling well above the floor. He pulled his knees up to his chest and wrapped his arms around them, making himself as small as possible. The bravado that had carried him through the parking lot confrontation had evaporated, leaving behind a scared child who'd just watched his little sister loaded into an ambulance. Marcus sat in the chair beside him, the plastic creaking under his weight. For several minutes, neither spoke. Marcus had no idea what to say. Comforting people wasn't exactly his forte. His usual approach to emotions involved ignoring them until they went away, preferably with the help of whiskey and the open road. But something about Ethan's quiet desperation made that option feel inadequate. "You were brave back there," Marcus finally said. "A lot of people wouldn't have had the guts to do what you did." Ethan didn't respond immediately. When he did speak, his voice was hollow. "I should have been watching her better. Mom always said I had to keep an eye on Lily, that she gets into everything. Dad says the same thing. But I went inside, and I was gone for maybe 5 minutes, and she just disappeared." Kids wander," Marcus said. "It's what they do, especially little ones." "But I'm supposed to stop her," Ethan's voice cracked. "That's my job. Dad has to work double shifts at the warehouse because Mom left and we need money for rent and food and stuff. He can't always be there, so I have to be the one who watches Lily. And I failed." The words hit Marcus harder than they should have. This kid, this 8-year-old boy, was carrying a weight that would crush most adults. Marcus recognized it because he'd carried something similar once, the impossible responsibility of keeping a younger sibling safe in a world that didn't care if children fell through the cracks. "You didn't fail," Marcus said firmly. "You found her. You warned us. You kept her from getting hurt worse. That's not failing, Ethan. That's being a hero." "Heroes don't let their sisters crawl under motorcycles," Ethan muttered, but there was a hint of something in his voice, maybe a desperate desire to believe Marcus's words. A doctor in green scrubs pushed through the family room door, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Are you Lily Cole's family?" she asked, looking between Marcus and Ethan with obvious confusion. "I'm her brother," Ethan said quickly, scrambling out of his chair. "Is she okay? Can I see her?" The doctor's expression shifted to professional kindness. "She's going to be fine. She has a broken radius, that's one of the bones in her forearm, and a mild concussion. We've set the brake and put her in a cast. She's awake and asking for you." The relief that washed over Ethan's face was so profound that Marcus felt it in his own chest. The boy sagged slightly, as if invisible strings holding him upright had been cut. "There is one concern," the doctor continued, her tone becoming more serious. "Lily told us she was sleeping under the motorcycle because she was trying to hide from the sun. She said she was tired and hot, and it seemed like a good spot. Now, I need to ask, where were your parents during this time?" Ethan's face closed down instantly, the wariness of a child who'd learned that honest answers sometimes led to worse problems. "My dad was at work. He works at a warehouse. He couldn't help it." "And your mother?" "She left." The words were flat, emotionless. 6 months ago." The doctor exchanged a look with Marcus that spoke volumes. He could read the unspoken questions in her eyes, questions about supervision, about 2 young children essentially left to fend for themselves, about whether Child Protective Services needed to be involved. Marcus stood, drawing the doctor's attention. "The kid's father is on his way. He should be here soon. Ethan did everything right. He found his sister. He stopped us before anyone could hurt her. He got help. Whatever you're thinking, this isn't a case of neglect. This is a family doing the best they can." The doctor studied him for a moment, taking in the leather vest, the tattoos, the hard edges that marked Marcus as someone who lived outside polite society's boundaries. But whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied something, because she nodded slowly. "The social worker will want to speak with the father when he arrives," she said. "That's protocol. But for now, let's focus on Lily. She's in room 4. You can see her, but please keep it short. She needs rest." Ethan bolted from the room before anyone could say another word. Marcus followed at a slower pace, watching as the boy practically flew down the hallway toward room 4. Through the open door, Marcus could see Lily propped up in a hospital bed that made her look even smaller than she was. Her left arm was encased in a bright blue cast, and a white bandage covered a scrape on her forehead. But her eyes were open, and when she saw Ethan, her face lit up with a smile that transformed her from an injured patient to just a little kid, happy to see her big brother. "Ethan!" Her voice was hoarse but strong. "Did you see my cast? It's blue. The doctor said I could have stickers on it." Ethan reached the bedside and grabbed his sister's good hand, holding it like a lifeline. "I was so scared, Lily. Why did you go under that motorcycle?" "I was sleepy," Lily said simply, as if this explained everything. "And it was shady there. I was going to sleep for just a minute, but then I had a bad dream and my arm hurt." Marcus stayed in the doorway, feeling like an intruder in this private moment, but Lily spotted him, her eyes widening. "Who's that?" "That's Marcus," Ethan said, turning to look at him with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. He helped me. He made sure you were okay." "Are you a bad guy?" Lily asked with the blunt curiosity only children possessed. "You look like the bad guys in Ethan's comic books." Despite everything, Marcus felt a smile tug at his lips. "Maybe I used to be, but I'm trying to be better." The words surprised him even as he spoke them. When had he decided that? When had the comfortable identity of the outlaw biker, the man who didn't care what society thought, started feeling like a costume that no longer fit? Marcus has a motorcycle, Ethan told his sister. A really big one. When you're all better, maybe he'll show you. Marcus opened his mouth to agree, then stopped. Making promises to these kids felt dangerous in a way that facing down rival gangs or riding through thunderstorms never had. Promises meant obligation. They meant caring about something beyond the next ride, the next stop, the next escape from whatever demons chased you. But looking at Ethan's hopeful face and Lily's bright eyes, Marcus found himself nodding. Yeah, when you're better, I'll show you both. I'll even let you sit on it. Really? Lily's excitement was palpable despite her injuries. Ethan, did you hear? I get to sit on a motorcycle. A commotion in the hallway drew Marcus's attention. A man in his mid-30s, wearing grease-stained warehouse coveralls and work boots, burst into view. His face was pale, his eyes wild with panic. Lily! Ethan! He rushed past Marcus into the room, dropping to his knees beside the hospital bed. Oh my God, baby girl, are you okay? The police called and said there was an accident and... I'm okay, Daddy, Lily said, though tears started streaming down her face now that her father was there. I broke my arm, but the doctor fixed it. See my blue cast? The man, presumably Thomas Cole, based on the name Ethan had given, pulled both his children into as gentle a hug as Lily's condition allowed. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, the weight of his fear and relief too heavy for words. Marcus backed out of the room, giving the family privacy. He stood in the hallway, suddenly unsure of what to do next. His brothers were probably still at the diner, dealing with police reports and questions. He should call them, let them know what was happening, maybe figure out where they were going to spend the night since their original plan to reach Gallup was clearly shot. But he found himself reluctant to leave. Officer Davidson's earlier look of suspicion had made it clear that the police would be watching this situation carefully. If Marcus left now, it might look like he'd been involved in something he shouldn't have been, like he was running from consequences. More than that, though, was the nagging feeling that Ethan needed someone to stay. The kid had held it together remarkably well, but Marcus recognized the signs of someone running on adrenaline and willpower. When that wore off, the crash would be hard. Thomas Cole emerged from Lily's room about 10 minutes later, his face still drawn, but more composed. He spotted Marcus immediately, and his expression shifted from confusion to wariness. Marcus was used to that look. It was the same one most people gave him when they took in the leather vest, the tattoos, the general air of someone who'd seen the darker side of life and decided to make a home there. "You're the one who brought Ethan here?" Thomas asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yeah, I'm Marcus Brennan, your son. He saved your daughter's life today. We were about to start our bikes, and he stopped us. If he hadn't..." Marcus trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The alternative was too horrific to voice. Thomas's face crumpled again. "He told me what happened, how she was under the motorcycle, how you could have..." He stopped, swallowing hard. "Thank you. For not starting the engine, for bringing Ethan here, for staying with him. Your kid's got more courage than most men I know," Marcus said honestly. He faced down 4 bikers without hesitation because his sister needed him. "You should be proud." "I am. God, I am." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so similar to one Ethan had made earlier that the family resemblance became obvious. I don't know how this happened. I thought they were safe at the diner. Doreen knows them, she keeps an eye out, but I can't always be there, and daycare costs money I don't have, and..." He cut himself off, clearly realizing he was sharing too much with a stranger. Marcus understood that impulse, the desperation to explain, to justify, to prove you weren't the terrible parent that circumstances might suggest. "The doctor mentioned a social worker," Marcus said quietly. "You should probably prepare for that conversation. They're going to have questions about supervision." Thomas's face went pale again. "I'm doing the best I can. Since Maria left, it's been..." Everything's been harder. But I love my kids. I'd never hurt them. I just have to work, and sometimes that means—" "I get it," Marcus interrupted. "You don't have to explain to me. But you'll need to explain to them. And it might help to have a plan, something that shows you're addressing the situation." They stood in silence for a moment, two men from completely different worlds, connected by a near tragedy and the remarkable courage of an 8-year-old boy. "The police will probably want to talk to you too," Thomas said eventually. "About the accident. I mean, it wasn't your fault, but—" "I know the drill," Marcus said. He dealt with cops enough times to understand how these situations played out. "I'll give a statement, answer their questions. Your kids don't need any more trouble because of me." Thomas studied him with an intensity that reminded Marcus of Ethan. "You're not what I expected." "Yeah, well, I get that a lot." Officer Davidson appeared at the end of the hallway, and Marcus straightened instinctively. The officer approached with his partner, a stocky woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Cole, Mr. Brennan," Davidson said, "we need to get official statements from both of you about what happened this afternoon. It won't take long." Marcus nodded, prepared for the tedious process of recounting the same story multiple times, while trained law enforcement officers looked for inconsistencies or signs of wrongdoing. But as he followed the officers to a small consultation room, he found his thoughts drifting back to Ethan and Lily, to the fragile family held together by a single father, working double shifts, and an 8-year-old trying to be the man of the house. It reminded Marcus uncomfortably of his own childhood, the one he'd spent decades trying to forget. The difference was that Ethan had managed to hold on to something Marcus had lost early: hope. The belief that caring about people was worth the risk, that doing the right thing mattered, even when it was terrifying. Maybe, Marcus thought, as he settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair to face the officer's questions, it wasn't too late for him to remember that lesson. 3 days after the parking lot incident, Marcus found himself doing something he'd sworn he'd never do again, sitting in a social services office in downtown Flagstaff, voluntarily subjecting himself to the scrutiny of government bureaucracy. The walls were covered in motivational posters featuring soaring eagles and inspirational quotes that felt hollow in the fluorescent lighting. A water-stained ceiling tile hung at an odd angle, and the carpet bore the grey-brown colour of something that had given up trying to look clean years ago. Across from him sat Jennifer Wallace, the social worker assigned to the Cole family's case. She was in her late 40s, with greying auburn hair pulled into a practical bun and eyes that had seen too many broken families to be surprised by much anymore. But Marcus could see curiosity in her expression as she reviewed the file in front of her. "I have to say, Mr. Brennan, when Thomas Cole listed you as a character reference, I was surprised." She looked up from the paperwork. "It's not every day a member of a motorcycle club volunteers to vouch for a single father he met during a near tragedy." Marcus shifted in his chair, which was clearly designed for someone 6 inches shorter and 50 pounds lighter. "Cole's a good father in a bad situation. His kids aren't neglected. They're just dealing with life kicking them in the teeth. According to the incident report, Lily was unsupervised when she crawled under a motorcycle. That raises concerns. She was at a diner with her brother. The waitress knows the family. It was a moment of bad luck, not bad parenting." Marcus heard the edge in his voice and forced himself to soften it. "Look, I'm not saying Cole's situation is ideal, but punishing him for being poor and overwhelmed isn't going to help those kids." Jennifer's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught the slight relaxation in her shoulders. "I'm not here to punish anyone, Mr. Brennan. I'm here to ensure the children's safety and well-being. Thomas Cole is cooperative and clearly devoted to his children, but he needs support, daycare assistance, perhaps counseling for the children to help them process their mother's abandonment. My job is to connect families with resources, not tear them apart." So, you're not taking the kids? No. There's no indication of abuse or willful neglect, but I will be monitoring the situation, and Mr. Cole has agreed to several conditions, including securing after-school care for Ethan and daycare for Lily when he's working. The relief Marcus felt was disproportionate to his actual involvement in the situation. He'd known the Cole family for 3 days. By any rational measure, what happened to them shouldn't matter to him. But rationality had taken a back seat the moment Ethan Cole had looked up at him with those desperate blue eyes and whispered, "Please, you can't." "There's another reason I wanted to speak with you," Jennifer continued, pulling out a separate document. "Thomas mentioned that you've been helpful, visiting the hospital, offering support. I'm curious about your motivation." There it was, the unspoken question that had been hanging in the air since Marcus walked into the office. "What's your angle? What do you want from this vulnerable family?" Marcus had anticipated it. In his world, nothing came free, and kindness usually had strings attached. He couldn't blame Jennifer for being suspicious. "I don't have an ulterior motive, if that's what you're asking," Marcus said. "I saw a kid show more courage in 5 minutes than most people manage in a lifetime. It made an impression. Call it wanting to pay forward something I wish someone had done for me when I was his age." Jennifer studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Brennan, your criminal record indicates—" "I know what my record says," Marcus interrupted. "Assault, theft, disturbing the peace, and a handful of other stupid decisions I made in my 20s. I've been clean for 12 years. No arrests, no violations. I work as a mechanic in Phoenix, I pay my taxes, and I've spent the last decade trying to be something other than what my record says I am. And yet you still wear the vest of a motorcycle club with a reputation for violence?" Marcus didn't flinch. "The Iron Serpents are family. Yeah, some members have done things I don't agree with, but they gave me a place when I had nowhere else to go. I don't apologize for that." Jennifer made a note on her pad, and Marcus resisted the urge to grab it and see what she was writing. He'd come here voluntarily because Thomas had asked him to, because Ethan had looked at him with something like trust, and Marcus didn't want to be the reason that trust was misplaced. "I'm going to be honest with you, Mr. Brennan," Jennifer said finally. "If Thomas wants you involved in his children's lives, that's his decision. You haven't given me any reason to object beyond your association with the Iron Serpents. But understand that if anything puts those children at risk, I will step in, clear, crystal." She stood, extending her hand. Marcus shook it, noting the firm grip that spoke of someone who'd learned to command respect in rooms full of people who didn't want to give it. As Marcus left the office and walked back to his bike, Rick had driven it to Flagstaff when the Iron Serpents had eventually continued their trip without him. He found himself thinking about the strange turn his life had taken. 4 days ago, he'd been cruising through Arizona with his brothers, thinking about nothing more complicated than where they'd sleep that night and when the next rally was scheduled. Now he was tangled up in the lives of a family he barely knew, making promises he wasn't sure he could keep, and genuinely caring about whether an 8-year-old boy thought he was worth trusting. His phone buzzed. A text from Thomas. "Bringing Lily home from hospital today. Ethan wants to know if you're still planning to show them your bike. No pressure." Marcus found himself smiling despite the autumn chill in the air. He typed back, "Tell him I keep my promises. When's good?" The response came quickly. "Tomorrow afternoon? We'll be at home. Same street as the diner. 3rd house on the left. Can't miss it. Needs paint." Marcus confirmed and pocketed his phone. Tomorrow afternoon. That gave him time to ride back to Phoenix tonight, let his brothers know he'd be away from the club for a while longer, and figure out what exactly he was doing involving himself so deeply in the Cole family's life. The Phoenix clubhouse sat on the industrial edge of the city, a converted warehouse that served as home base for the Arizona chapter of the Iron Serpents. When Marcus arrived late that evening, the place was alive with activity. Bikes parked in chaotic rows, music thumping from inside, the smell of grilling meat and cigarette smoke hanging heavy in the air. Danny was the first to spot him, jogging over with a grin. "Marcus! Man, we were wondering when you'd show back up. How's the kid?" "His sister okay?" "Both fine," Marcus said, dismounting and pulling off his helmet. "Little girl's got a broken arm, but she'll heal. The boy's handling it better than most adults would." "That's good. Real good." Danny's expression turned more serious. "The cops gave us all kinds of grief, you know. Wanted to know if we'd been drinking, if we were speeding through the parking lot, all this crap. But they finally accepted it was just a freak accident." "It was," Marcus agreed. Wrong place, wrong time, and a little girl who thought a motorcycle looked like a good napping spot. "You planning to come in? Some of the guys want to hear the whole story." Marcus glanced toward the clubhouse. He could see shadows moving behind the grimy windows, hear the familiar sounds of his brothers laughing and arguing and living the life they'd chosen. For 20 years, that had been enough. The club, the road, the freedom from expectations and responsibilities. "Actually, I think I'm going to head to my place," Marcus said. "It's been a long week." Danny's eyebrows rose. "You okay, man? You've been acting weird since Flagstaff." "I'm fine. Just thinking about some things." "This about that kid, Ethan?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. "How did you explain to your brothers that a chance encounter with an 8-year-old had made you question everything about the life you'd built? How did you articulate the feeling that maybe being an outlaw biker wasn't as meaningful as being someone a scared kid could count on?" "Yeah," he finally said. "It's about Ethan and his sister and their dad who's trying to hold everything together with duct tape and hope. It just got to me, I guess." Danny was quiet for a moment, then clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "You always did have a soft spot under all that leather and attitude. Go do what you need to do. But don't forget who your real family is, yeah?" The words, though meant kindly, hit harder than Danny probably intended. Marcus nodded and made his way to his apartment. A small one-bedroom place about 10 miles from the clubhouse that served as the official address he put on paperwork and not much else. The apartment was sparse and impersonal. A mattress on the floor, a TV that didn't work, a kitchen he never used. This was where Marcus Brennan technically lived, but it wasn't home. Home was the road, the club, the constant movement that kept him from having to think too hard about what his life had become. He lay on the mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and thought about Ethan's hand slipping into his in that parking lot, thought about Lily's innocent question, "Are you a bad guy?" and his answer that had surprised him with its honesty. "Maybe I used to be, but I'm trying to be better." When had he decided to try? What had changed in that moment when a boy stood between him and his motorcycle and said, with everything he had, "Don't start your motorcycles"? Marcus didn't have answers, but as he finally drifted toward sleep, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow afternoon, to showing Ethan and Lily his bike, to proving that promises made to children were worth keeping. It was a start. Maybe not redemption. Not yet. But a step in a direction Marcus hadn't even known he wanted to go. The coal house sat at the end of a street where optimism had long since given way to pragmatism. The aluminum siding had faded to a dull grey, and the small front yard was more dirt than grass. A rusted swing set listed to one side, its chains missing, a remnant from better times. But the windows were clean, and someone had attempted to brighten the concrete steps with potted plants that struggled valiantly against the Arizona climate. Marcus pulled his Harley to the curb and cut the engine. Before he could dismount, the front door flew open and Ethan burst out, his face lit with an excitement that made him look younger than his 8 years. Lily followed more carefully, her left arm in its blue cast held protectively against her chest, Thomas hovering behind her like a nervous shadow. "You came!" Ethan shouted, already racing toward the motorcycle. "I told Lily you'd come, but she wasn't sure, and Dad said not to get my hopes up in case you were busy, but you're here." "Told you I keep my promises," Marcus said, swinging his leg over the bike. He pulled off his helmet and set it on the seat, then turned his attention to Lily, who had stopped at the edge of the yard, suddenly shy. "How's the arm, kiddo?" "It itches," Lily said, inching closer, "but the doctor says I can't scratch under the cast. Ethan signed it already. Want to see?" She held out her arm, and Marcus crouched down to examine the signatures and doodles covering the bright blue plaster. Ethan had drawn what looked like a motorcycle, or possibly a very elaborate bicycle, along with his name in careful block letters. Someone else had added a smiley face and "Get well soon." "That's pretty cool," Marcus said sincerely. "Blue's a good color." "I wanted pink, but they didn't have pink," Lily explained with the seriousness of someone discussing a major life disappointment. "So I picked blue because that's Ethan's favorite." Thomas had made his way down the steps, his expression cautious but welcoming. "Thanks for coming. The kids haven't talked about anything else since you texted." "No problem." Marcus straightened, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in this neighborhood. A leather-clad biker standing in front of a struggling family's home, drawing curious glances from neighbors who probably already had the police on speed dial. "So," Ethan said, practically vibrating with anticipation. "Can we sit on it now, please?" Marcus glanced at Thomas, who nodded. "All right, Ethan first, since he's older." He helped the boy climb onto the bike, positioning him carefully on the seat. Ethan's hands immediately went to the handlebars, gripping them with reverence. "It's so big," he breathed. "How do you reach the ground?" "Lots of practice and longer legs," Marcus said with a smile. "When I was your age, I couldn't even imagine being tall enough to ride one of these." "Did you always want a motorcycle?" The question was innocent, but it touched on memories Marcus usually kept locked away. "Yeah," he admitted. "My uncle had one. He'd take me for rides sometimes before things got complicated. It was the only time I felt like I was flying." Ethan looked up at him with those clear blue eyes. "What got complicated?" "Life," Marcus said simply. "It does that sometimes." Lily was tugging on his vest. "My turn! My turn!" Marcus lifted Ethan off and then carefully positioned Lily on the seat, making sure she was secure and her cast wouldn't hit anything. She squealed with delight, bouncing slightly until Marcus steadied her. "Careful, Lily Pad," Thomas warned, using what was clearly a long-standing nickname. "Remember your arm." "I'm being careful," Lily insisted, though her wiggling suggested otherwise. "Marcus, can we go for a ride? Just around the block?" "Not today," Marcus said, catching the alarm in Thomas's face. "Your arm needs to heal first, but maybe someday when you're older and your dad says it's okay." "Dad never says it's okay for anything fun," Lily grumbled, but she was smiling. After the children had both taken their turns sitting on the bike, taken approximately 50 photos with Thomas's phone, and extracted a promise from Marcus that he'd come back, Thomas invited him inside for coffee. Marcus almost declined. He could feel the weight of neighborhood attention, could imagine the stories already forming about the dangerous biker hanging around the Cole family. But something in Thomas's expression, a loneliness that mirrored Marcus's own, made him accept. The inside of the house was as modest as the exterior suggested. The furniture was old but clean, the carpet worn but vacuumed. Photos covered nearly every flat surface, pictures of the kids at various ages, school photos with awkward smiles and carefully combed hair, a few older images that Marcus assumed included the absent mother, though her face had been carefully cut out of most of them. "Sorry about the mess," Thomas said, moving some of Lily's toys off the couch. "I try to keep up, but it's—" "You don't have to explain," Marcus said. "Place looks fine to me." They sat at the small kitchen table while Thomas made coffee in a pot that looked like it predated both children. Ethan and Lily had disappeared into their shared bedroom, their excited voices carrying down the hallway as they no doubt replayed every moment of the motorcycle visit. "The social worker came by yesterday," Thomas said, setting 2 mugs on the table. The coffee was weak but hot. "Jennifer Wallace. She said you spoke with her." "Yeah. Wanted to make sure she understood you're doing your best." Thomas wrapped his hands around his mug, staring into the dark liquid. "Sometimes I wonder if my best is enough. Maria thought it wasn't. That's why she left." It was the first time Thomas had directly mentioned his wife's departure. Marcus said nothing, recognizing the need some people had to fill silence with confessions. "We met in high school," Thomas continued. "Got married too young, had Ethan before we were ready. I thought we'd figure it out, you know. People do, but Maria, she wanted more than I could give her. More money, more excitement, more everything. And one day she just packed a bag and left. Didn't even say goodbye to the kids properly. Just gone." "That's rough," Marcus said, meaning it. "The worst part is that Ethan remembers everything. He asks why she left, if it was his fault, if she's coming back, and I don't have good answers. How do you tell your son that his mother chose leaving over staying, that sometimes people give up when things get hard?" Marcus thought about his own mother, a woman so destroyed by addiction and poverty that she'd eventually surrendered him and his sister to the system. He thought about the foster homes, the brief moments of stability shattered by adults who couldn't handle the responsibility of broken children. "You tell him the truth," Marcus said finally. "That his mother had problems that had nothing to do with him. That her leaving was about her weakness, not his worth. And you make sure he knows that you're not going anywhere." Thomas looked at him with surprise. "That's actually good advice." "Had a lot of time to think about it," Marcus said wryly. "My mother left too. Different circumstances, but same result. Took me 30 years to understand it wasn't my fault." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 men bonded by the shared experience of being abandoned and the determination not to repeat that pattern with the next generation. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said eventually. "Why are you doing this? I mean, you barely know us. You could have walked away after the hospital and no one would have blamed you. But you're here, sitting in my kitchen, drinking terrible coffee and listening to my problems. Why?" Marcus considered the question. He could give the easy answer, that Ethan's courage had impressed him, that he felt responsible for almost being part of a tragedy. But Thomas deserved better than platitudes. "Because when I was Ethan's age, I needed someone to show me that not all adults would let me down," Marcus said. "And nobody did. Every single person who should have been there, my parents, my foster families, the social workers, they all failed in one way or another. So I grew up believing that the world was full of people who'd promised things they had no intention of delivering. And you don't want Ethan to believe that?" "I don't want Ethan to become what I became," Marcus corrected. "Hard, angry, so convinced that caring about people was a weakness that I spent 20 years proving I didn't need anyone. That's a miserable way to live, Thomas. And your kids, they're good kids. They deserve to know that sometimes adults do keep their promises." Thomas's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Thank you for being here, for being someone Ethan can, I don't know, look up to, model himself after. You're showing him what it looks like to be a man who keeps his word, and I can't tell you how much that means." The words settled in Marcus's chest with unexpected weight. Model himself after. When had Marcus Brennan become someone worth modeling anything after? The idea was almost laughable. A biker with a criminal record, a man who'd spent decades running from responsibility, suddenly cast as a role model for a young boy. But maybe that was the point. Maybe redemption wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about choosing, in this moment and every moment after, to be someone worth looking up to. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, clutching a worn notebook. "Marcus, I drew pictures of your motorcycle. Want to see?" Marcus accepted the notebook and flipped through pages of surprisingly detailed sketches. Ethan had captured the Harley from multiple angles, adding flourishes and modifications that showed real imagination. The kid had talent. "These are good," Marcus said, genuinely impressed. "You take art classes or something?" "No, I just like drawing. Dad says art doesn't pay bills, though." Thomas winced. "I didn't mean it like that, buddy. I just meant, it's okay, Dad." Ethan's voice was matter-of-fact, too mature for an 8-year-old. "I know we don't have money for extra stuff. It's fine." But it wasn't fine. Marcus could see it in the way Ethan's shoulders hunched slightly, in the careful way he held the notebook, as if expecting it to be dismissed as unimportant. "Tell you what," Marcus said, an idea forming. "I've got a friend who owns a custom paint shop. He does designs for bikes, cars, all kinds of stuff. Maybe I could get him to show you some techniques. Would you be interested in that?" Ethan's face lit up like someone had flipped a switch. "Really? You'd do that?" "Sure, if your dad says it's okay." Thomas looked overwhelmed but nodded. That would be great." Marcus stayed another hour, looking at more of Ethan's drawings, listening to Lily's rambling stories about kindergarten, and drinking more of Thomas's terrible coffee. When he finally left, promising to return soon, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Riding back toward Phoenix as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Marcus found himself thinking about the conversation with Thomas. About being someone worth modeling after, about promises and responsibility, and the strange way life had of giving you second chances when you least expected them. His phone rang, hands-free system kicking in through his helmet speakers. Rick's voice filled his ears. "Marcus, man, where are you? We've got to run to Reno this weekend. Big rally, lots of clubs showing up. Danny's already loading his bike." "I can't make it," Marcus said, the words coming easier than he expected. "What? Why not?" "I've got something I need to take care of here." There was a pause. "This about that kid? The one from Flagstaff?" "Yeah, him and his family. They need help, and I want to help them." Another pause. Longer this time. "Marcus, you know I love you like a brother. But you're not responsible for every broken family you come across. You can't save everyone." "I'm not trying to save everyone," Marcus said quietly. "Just them. Just this once, I want to be the person who doesn't walk away." Rick sighed. "All right. But the club needs you too, brother. Don't forget that." "I won't." But as Marcus ended the call and focused on the road ahead, he wondered if maybe, for the first time in his adult life, he was starting to understand what really mattered. The Iron Serpents would always be his family. That bond ran too deep to break. But there were other kinds of families, other kinds of brothers, and maybe being worthy of Ethan Cole's trust was worth more than any patch on his vest. The sun painted the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple as Marcus rode through the gathering dusk. Somewhere behind him, an 8-year-old boy was probably showing his father yet another drawing of a motorcycle. Somewhere ahead, the life Marcus had carefully constructed waited, unchanged and unchallenged. But Marcus Brennan was beginning to realize that the road forward might look different than the road behind. And for the first time in 20 years, that thought didn't fill him with fear. It filled him with hope. 6 months had passed since that September afternoon when Ethan Cole's desperate warning had changed everything. Winter had given way to an early Arizona spring, and the desert bloomed with unexpected color, purple lupines and golden poppies, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost gentle. Marcus stood in the doorway of his apartment, barely recognizing the space. The mattress on the floor had been replaced by an actual bed frame. The kitchen, once purely decorative, now showed signs of actual use. Dishes in the drainer, groceries in the cabinets, a coffee pot that produced something drinkable. Photos had appeared on the walls, including one that Thomas had insisted on taking. Marcus with Ethan and Lily, all three of them sitting on the Harley, grinning at the camera like they'd known each other for years instead of months. It was still a small apartment, still modest by any standard, but it felt like home in a way that the clubhouse never had. His phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Don't forget, my art show is at 6. Dad says you better be there or Lily will be mad." Marcus smiled, typing back, "Wouldn't miss it. Tell Lily I'm bringing a surprise." The surprise sat on his kitchen counter, a set of professional-grade art supplies that had cost more than Marcus wanted to admit, but less than the kid's talent deserved. Over the past 6 months, Marcus had watched Ethan transform from a boy carrying the world on his thin shoulders to someone who'd rediscovered joy. The art had been part of that transformation, an outlet for emotions that words couldn't capture. Marcus's friend Tony, who owned the custom paint shop, had taken Ethan under his wing, teaching him techniques and encouraging his natural ability. The kid was good, really good. Tonight's art show at his elementary school would display some of his work, and Marcus had promised to be there. The Iron Serpents Motorcycle Club had taken the news of Marcus's gradual withdrawal about as well as could be expected. He still wore the vest, still rode with his brothers when he could. But the long runs had become shorter, the rallies less frequent. He'd explained it as wanting to settle down a bit, to focus on his mechanic work, and maybe think about the future differently. Danny had understood first. "You're getting soft on us, old man," he'd said with a grin. "But I get it, that kid and his family, they got to you. Nothing wrong with that." Rick had been less understanding. "You're choosing them over your brothers? Over the club?" "I'm not choosing anything over anyone," Marcus had replied. "I'm just making room for something else in my life. The club will always be family, but maybe I can have more than one family." That conversation had been tense, and the relationship with some of his brothers had cooled. But others, like Danny and even Tyler, had started coming around, sometimes joining Marcus when he visited the Coles, awkwardly interacting with the kids, discovering that being part of something beyond the club wasn't as much of a betrayal as they'd feared. The art show was held in the elementary school gymnasium, which had been transformed with student artwork covering every available surface. Parents and families milled around, admiring crayon drawings of stick-figure families, paint-splattered abstract pieces, and carefully crafted clay sculptures. The air buzzed with proud conversations and the high-pitched chatter of children showing off their work. Marcus spotted Thomas first, standing near a display of drawings, with Lily perched on his shoulders so she could see better. The past 6 months had been good to Thomas Cole. The circles under his eyes had faded, and he'd gained back some of the weight that stress had stripped away. With help from social services and a new job with better hours, something Marcus had quietly helped arrange through a contact at the warehouse, Thomas had found a more sustainable balance. "Marcus!" Lily shrieked when she spotted him, wiggling until Thomas set her down. She ran over. Her blue cast long, since replaced by a fully healed arm, she waved demonstratively. "You came!" "Did you see Ethan's pictures? They're the best ones here." "I'm sure they are," Marcus said, allowing himself to be dragged toward Ethan's display. And they were. 6 pieces hung in a neat row, each one showcasing the growth and skill that 6 months of dedicated practice and good teaching had nurtured. But it was the last piece, the largest one, that made Marcus's breath catch. It was a portrait, black and white pencil work with incredible detail, of Marcus himself. The artist had captured something beyond the physical features, the intensity in the eyes, the weathered quality of hard years lived, but also something softer around the edges, something that looked almost like hope. Beneath the portrait, a small placard read, "My Hero" by Ethan Cole. "Do you like it?" Ethan's voice came from beside him, nervous and eager. "I wanted to draw you because you're important. You showed me that people can be better than what others think they are. That's what heroes do, right? Marcus felt his throat tighten. He crouched down to Ethan's level, meeting those blue eyes that had first locked onto his in a dusty parking lot 6 months ago. "It's perfect," Marcus said, his voice rougher than usual. "You captured something I didn't even know was there." "What?" "The person I'm trying to be." Ethan grinned, and in that smile Marcus saw the boy he'd first met, the one who'd faced down 4 bikers without hesitation because his sister needed him. But he also saw someone lighter, less burdened, given the space to be a child again. The art show continued around them, but Marcus stayed fixed in that moment, looking at a portrait that somehow showed him the truth. Marcus Brennan had spent 20 years running from responsibility, from connection, from the possibility that caring about people might matter more than the freedom he chased across endless highways. It had taken an 8-year-old boy's desperate warning to stop him in his tracks, to make him look beneath the surface. To show him that redemption wasn't some grand, dramatic transformation, it was the accumulation of small choices, small promises kept, small moments where you decided to be better than your past. "Speech time," someone called out, and the gym quieted as the art teacher took the makeshift stage. Marcus found himself standing with Thomas, both of them watching, as Ethan was called up with several other students to receive recognition for exceptional work. The boy stood there holding a certificate, grinning so wide it had to hurt. "Thank you," Thomas said quietly beside him, "for all of this, for being there when we needed someone, for showing Ethan that men can be counted on." "Thank you," Marcus replied, "for letting me be part of your family, for giving me a reason to be someone worth counting on." The awards ceremony concluded, and families began filtering out into the warm spring evening. Marcus walked with the Coles to the parking lot, where his Harley sat among the minivans and sedans, as out of place as he'd once felt in this world of PTA meetings and art shows. But he didn't feel out of place anymore. "Can we get ice cream?" Lily asked, tugging on her father's sleeve. "Please, I got all A's on my report card." "You got all A's?" Thomas feigned surprise, though Marcus knew he'd already celebrated this achievement earlier in the week. "Well, I suppose we could—" "I'll buy," Marcus interrupted. "Consider it a celebration for Ethan's art and Lily's report card and everything." They went to a small ice cream shop on Route 89, not far from Rusty's diner where everything had started. Marcus ordered a simple vanilla cone, watching as Ethan and Lily debated between elaborate sundaes with names like Chocolate Explosion and Berry Blast. They sat at outdoor tables under the fading light, eating ice cream and talking about nothing important, school projects and upcoming summer plans, and whether Lily could convince her father to let her get a pet hamster. It was mundane and ordinary and absolutely perfect. As the sun finally surrendered to the night, painting the sky in deep purples and reds, Marcus's phone rang. The Iron Serpent's insignia flashed on the screen. He excused himself and walked a short distance away to answer. "Marcus, it's Danny. Look, we've got a situation in Tucson, nothing major, but we could use your help. Can you ride down tonight?" Marcus looked back at the Coles. Ethan was showing Lily something on his phone, both of them laughing. Thomas sat with his head tilted back, finally relaxed, finally looking like a man who believed tomorrow might be better than today. "I can't make it tonight," Marcus said, "but I can head down first thing in the morning. Will that work?" There was surprise in Danny's voice. "Yeah, man, that'll work. Everything okay?" "Everything's good. I'm exactly where I need to be." When he returned to the table, Ethan looked at him with concern. "Do you have to go?" "Not tonight," Marcus said, settling back into his chair. "Tonight I'm right here." And he was. Not on some distant highway chasing a freedom that never quite satisfied. Not running from ghosts that would follow him regardless of how fast he rode. But here, In this moment, with this unlikely family that had become as important to him as the brothers he'd ridden with for 20 years, the months ahead would bring challenges. They always did. Thomas would face new struggles with work and parenting. The kids would have their own obstacles to overcome. Marcus would continue balancing his loyalty to the Iron Serpents with his commitment to the Coles. Life didn't offer fairy tale endings where all problems dissolved into happy ever after. But it offered something better. The choice to keep showing up, to keep being better, to keep proving that second chances were worth taking. As they finally prepared to leave, Ethan tugged on Marcus's vest. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. That day at the diner when I stopped you from starting your motorcycle, were you scared of me?" Marcus thought about the question carefully. "No, I was scared for you, because you were doing something brave, and brave people often end up hurt. But I was also proud of you, even though I'd just met you. Does that make sense?" Ethan nodded slowly. "I was really scared of you, all of you, but I was more scared of what would happen to Lily if I didn't try." "That's what courage is," Marcus said. "Being scared, but doing the right thing anyway. You taught me that, you know. I'd forgotten it somewhere along the way." "I taught you?" Ethan's eyes widened. "But you're the grown-up." "Yeah, well, sometimes kids know important things that adults have forgotten, like how to be brave, how to care about people even when it's terrifying, how to give someone a second chance, even when they look like someone who doesn't deserve one." Marcus ruffled Ethan's hair, then pulled the boy into a brief hug. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not being too scared to warn me that day, for seeing something in me I'd stopped seeing in myself." They parted ways in the parking lot, the Coles to their modest house, Marcus to his apartment that finally felt like home. But before he mounted his Harley, Marcus took a moment to look at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. 6 months ago, he'd been a man defined by his past, by his mistakes, by the rough edges that kept people at a distance. Today, he was still that man in many ways. The leather vest still bore the Iron Serpent's patch, the tattoos still marked his arms, the hard years still showed in his face. But he was also more than that. He was Ethan's hero, immortalized in pencil and paper. He was someone Thomas trusted with his children. He was a man who'd learned that running from responsibility wasn't freedom. It was prison. And somewhere in the transformation from the man who almost started his motorcycle that September afternoon to the man who now couldn't imagine life without the Cole family in it, Marcus Brennan had found something he'd spent 42 years searching for. He'd found redemption. Not the dramatic cinematic kind that wiped away all sins in one grand gesture, but the real kind. The daily choice to be better, to show up, to keep promises to children who believed you were worth trusting. Marcus started his bike, the familiar rumble of the engine no longer just a call to escape, but a reminder of where he'd been and how far he'd come. The road stretched ahead, lit by streetlights and starlight, full of unknown challenges and unexpected grace. But wherever that road led, Marcus knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never again ignore a desperate warning from a brave child. Because sometimes, in the most unlikely moments, the people who save us are the ones we least expect, and sometimes, when you stop running long enough to listen, you discover that the person who needed saving most was you.